What does history say about teams remaining in their draft lottery odds spots? We'll discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, March 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the nation's #1 sports podcasting network, and it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And shout out to everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. Today, we are going to discuss the history of the draft lottery and teams who have been able to remain in their spots, the likelihood of it when it comes to draft lottery, and how many draws it has been in the past versus what it is like now, and what has happened in between. And also, we are going to discuss the defense core for the Florida Panthers going forward, is if Mike Benning is actually blocked going into next year, and the options that Bill Zito has, as Mike Benning is more than likely going to be finishing the season with the Florida Panthers at the pro hockey team. And then segment number 3, we are going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Minnesota Wild, who the Panthers will be welcoming them on 90s night at Amerant Bank Arena. So let's discuss more of this, because the Panthers are heading towards the draft lottery, and just because that they are outside of the top 10 does not mean that they have a 0% chance of winning the lottery. Obviously, when you look at anywhere with the Florida Panthers finishing from 11 to 16, you look at the odds there of winning the lottery, which is 3%, 2.5, 2, 1.5, 0.5, and 0.5 there for the chances. And then when you get inside of the top 10, 3.5, 5, 6, 6.5, going in reverse order there that time around. So the Panthers it looks like that they're gonna, based on where the standings are right now, it looks like the odds are going to be fit for them to finish somewhere in between, as low as number 6, which is right now currently held by the Winnipeg Jets at a 507 points percentage. Right now, the Panthers are at a 521 points percentage, and the highest they're going to go here is at number 12, which is right now belongs to New Jersey Devils, who have a 529 points percentage. Sounds when I say 529, it sounds like I'm talking about college plans for a kid. But obviously things are thrown off sometimes because there are games in hand that teams still have to that things need to equal out, because the Panthers do have 3 games in hand on the Toronto Maple Leafs, who won back-to-back games against the New York Rangers and the Boston Bruins the night before. So right now the Panthers have 3 games in hand on the Toronto Maple Leafs, but there is a chance that Toronto's record could actually and their lottery odds could actually drop based on what happens with the San Jose Sharks and the Winnipeg Jets, who right now for the Panthers, as far as lottery odds for Thursday, March 26th, it goes as follows as the games to watch for tonight: Wild at Panthers, Kraken at Lightning, Sharks at Blues, which they faced the Blues 2 more times, Avalanche at Jets, and then Kings at Canucks, which the Vancouver Canucks are well in position to get to lock in the best odds to get the number 1 overall pick, which again, there's 2 separate categories with the odds to at least win a lottery, which is 2 separate draws for this one, which is something that was made into effect in the 2021 offseason, and also the chances of getting the number 1 overall pick, which that one is the 25.5 there. So again, 2 different draws, but it wasn't always that way. And it's been a while for the Florida Panthers as far as having a chance at the number 1 overall pick. We can go back as early as 2020, because with the season ending early and having 3 different draws in that draft, that was a sign that things needed to at least be changed as far as things going for the draft lottery, because uh, the Ottawa Senators remained in that spot. That was actually in the same draft where they had their own pick, and then they had the pick from the San Jose Sharks from the Erik Karlsson trade, which they ended up getting Jake Sanderson with the 5th overall pick. They used their own pick to draft Tim Stützle there, which that is a trade that is franchise changing for them, and also that draft alone, which right now the Ottawa Senators find themselves in a playoff spot after winning back-to-back in New York and then Detroit, which right now Detroit it's not looking so good as far as them making the playoffs. But let's go back to when the draft lottery first came to the NHL, and that was the first time was in 1995. So from 1995 all the way until 2015, it was just one single lottery. So it was only the possibility of 2 teams who were able to jump their spots. But also there have been different rule changes for the lottery since as well. So they went from 1 team, excuse me, to 3 different lottery selections. And then after the 2020 season, which only 4 seasons of doing 3, now it's gone down to 2. But if you had to guess, and again, just because the Panthers land outside of the top 10 does not mean they don't have a chance. But at the same time, right now, the maximum spots that you can jump is 10. And that has been a recent change. But at the same time, there has been a change for the draft lottery is if you win it and you don't move a spot, that you can't win the lottery and move up a spot again in a span of 5 years. So that has been one drastic change for the NHL there as far as how they have conducted the lottery. So if you had to guess what the number is of teams since the draft lottery has been around in 1995, how many teams have actually remained in their spots as far as teams winning the lottery? There have been 45 total draws since, going back to 1 draw, 3, and now at the current format, 2. The answer is 13. Only 13 of 45 draws, less than a third of teams who have gotten the right balls have won the NHL draft lottery, which the Panthers, both times that they have won the draft lottery, actually 4 times, excuse me, it's always been where the Panthers have moved up, and 3 of them have been where they've had the chance to make the pick. And then going back to the very first time, it was actually where they indirectly gave the Tampa Bay Lightning the number 1 overall pick. They traded their first round pick to the San Jose Sharks in bringing in Victor Kozlov to the Panthers, as him and Pavel Bure were a match on that line. And that's when the back-to-back Rocket Richard trophies were won by Pavel Bure. And then the 2 times in 2002 and 2003, they went from 3rd to 1st, which that was the Rick Nash draft. And then they traded out of that one to select Nathan Horton. And then the very next year, they won again, going from 4 to 1. They already had Roberto Luongo in the organization. They traded out of that pick and then ended up getting Jay Bouwmeester in that one. But there was a year where they lost the draft lottery where Nathan MacKinnon was going 1st overall. The Panthers had the best odds. Colorado had the 2nd best, and they ended up getting the 1st overall pick. And then in 2014, the Panthers jumped the Buffalo Sabres that year to get Aaron Ekblad there. And that was where the Buffalo Sabres drafted Sam Reinhart, which Sam Reinhart ended up with the Florida Panthers organization. Anyway, so, but again, there's been so much movement, and the lowest slot that we've seen as far as teams jumping from their original slot actually happened just last year, and it happened twice in the same draft, which Utah ended up getting the 4th overall pick, getting Caleb Desnoyers, who recently just signed his ELC. And then the New York Islanders going from 11 to 1. That's where they had the opportunity to draft Matthew Schaefer, and they didn't have to go full tank there to rebuild their roster, which is very admirable there. But there's also that luck when it comes to it. But when it comes to the Panthers, and right now their chances at the lottery, right now they're not in a safe, quote unquote, safe zone. And yes, the likelihood of two teams outside of number 8 to jump are unlikely. But if the Panthers really do want to guarantee them being in a top 10 position, the safe zone for the Panthers would be the number eighth best lottery odds, which right now is occupied by the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I'm assuming that they will drop even more based on San Jose having 4 games in hand, Winnipeg having 2 games in hand on the Leafs. So chances are that those are going to be games where Toronto's going to drop. But at the same time, the Panthers do have the opportunity because of how many players that they are going to be resting, which right now Anton Lundell needs some time to heal with the rib injury and the MRI not looking good. Mackie Semiskevich isn't going to return to the lineup tonight for the Panthers. Belinskas and Mikkola are out for the year. Barkov hasn't played for at all this season, so the chances are great, but this is a discussion of the safe zone of where it is for the Florida Panthers as far as their draft lottery odds. And I'm just reloading Tankathon right now as far as the draft lottery simulator. And right now, every single going for that, looking at the number 8th best odds, which is occupied by the Toronto Maple Leafs, there hasn't been a single simulation whereas had them coming outside of the top 10, which again, their first round pick is going to the Boston Bruins, chances are, because there's this top 5 protected. But I'm just using that as an example of number 8 spot and relating it to the Florida Panthers on what is the safe zone for the Florida Panthers and their chances of keeping their first round pick, which was sent to Chicago in the Seth Jones deal. So that is kind of an idea of where to look at when it comes to the Panthers there. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss the options that Bill Zito has when it comes to his defense core come next year. And is Mike Benning going to be blocked for an opportunity to return to the Panthers come next year based on his exemption status? And could there actually be remorse from the front office on an extension that they signed just a few months ago? We'll discuss that next year on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. And what if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your position live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when the momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but I never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. And now I can take part of it live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator, play by play. You decide. Trade every play with Robinhood. Now available across the US. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And don't forget to sign up for our Everydayer Club for an ad-free edition of the show and access to the group chat with me and other listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So I do want to say a congratulations to the Panthers AHL affiliate in the Charlotte Checkers for punching their ticket to the Calder Cup playoffs. And there's one other team in the Panthers organization that still has a little bit of work to do in the Savannah Ghost Pirates, as they have a 4-point lead over the Jacksonville Icemen to clinch their spot in the Kelly Cup playoffs right now. So right now it looks like that the Savannah Ghost Pirates, if the season were to end today, that they will be facing the Florida Everblades in round 1 of the Kelly Cup playoffs, which the top 4 in the ECHL are the ones to make it to the postseason there. But let's discuss more about just the status of the blue line and the fact that first of all, there's opportunity here. The Panthers have 6 defensemen signed through next season. Forsling, Ekblad, Mikkola, Jones, Kulikov, and Belinskas, with Belinskas being the latest Panther to sign an extension, which it's not a very expensive contract. And Belinskas has proven to be a player who has been very reliable, plug and play. But when you look at the Panthers and trying to make the best out of their championship window that they are still currently in. Been the season of hell when it's come to the injuries that the Panthers have suffered here. The Panthers going forward, when it comes to the increase in the cap and the fact that they're going to have some flexibility to still fit everyone in this season if everyone was healthy. Again, we've talked about it during the offseason of which players would have had to be purged off the roster. So this is a little bit of the blessing of this kind of season where you can put LTIR some guys and still fit guys into the mix, which I'm still waiting to see when Jonah Gadjevich is going to be back. But also another injury update is Cole Schwint has an opportunity to be back with the Florida Panthers after their back-to-back this weekend in both Long Island and New York City. So when Schwint got hurt in the game against Toronto in the first game back from the Olympic break, I was thinking, okay, his season is likely over. And honestly, defensively, when Cole Schwint was in the game, uh, that was a line that was not giving up a lot of goals against, which Tomas Nosek being back with the Panthers and then Schwint at times being with the team, the fourth line has actually been doing the job for this Panthers team. And for this defense core for the Florida Panthers, going back to them, is with Mike Benning not having the option to just go to Charlotte next season because he's going to run out of exemptions based on the seasons that he's been with the Florida Panthers. Again, he did sign a 1-year deal as an RFA, 1 year, $775K to return to the Panthers with the organization because the Panthers really like him there, and has already surpassed the amount of games. Although this other player that I'm about to mention is a forward in Justin Sourdif, which Justin Sourdif only played 3 games total with the Florida Panthers. Remember, in the 23-24 season, he and Mackie Semaskevich started the season. It was like a flip-flop of who was going to be in the lineup, who was not, and then both of them were sent back down throughout that year there. And then Justin Sourdif was called up. It was a situation where Eetu Luostarinen, I believe, was his wife was giving birth, and then Justin Sourdif was called up. He actually scores a goal on the road in Nashville, and they come up with a big win. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Sourdif got the GWG in that game. But Sourdif being able to play in multiple situations, penalty kill, power play, top line minutes, improved his value in the trade market with Washington, and now he's thrived. He's playing at times playing top line center for the Washington Capitals as far as that. So big ups to him and big ups to the Florida Panthers front office and their development program for getting Justin Sourdif's game to the point where you get something back. But it also could be that situation with Mike Benning here for the Panthers, because this is a tryout for him, not only for next year, but the year after there for him. And and this was a question going back to when Uvis Balinskis was signed to begin with on that extension is, okay, this likely means that Mike Benning's time with the Florida Panthers is going to be over after this season. But with the recent play here and the fact that he's given overtime minutes, he's been given power play 2 minutes as well at times, it just makes me wonder, because especially with the injury to Seth Jones and the fact that you don't want to use Aaron Ekblad and Gustav Forsling in a break glass in case of emergency situation, which we've seen too many times this year. And the fact that Uvis Balinskis, when he's given those power play 2 minutes, which it's crazy because even before Seth Jones was traded to the Florida Panthers in 2025, Uvis Balinskis was the one given those power play 1 minutes after Adam Boquist was hit in the mouth on opening night just last year, and the Panthers really had a hard time finding players for those 2 units as far as solidifying that position. But what if you could solidify that in power play 1 and power play 2? But the issue is, if you have multiple players on one-way deals, I mean, they could be two-way contracts, but not waivers exempt. That's what I was trying to say, because two-way contract does not mean waivers exempt, for those out there wondering. If you have that situation for this decor, which there is pros and cons to it. The pro is you don't have that flexibility to plug and play from the AHL, which there's still time for guys like Miklos Havorka, who's still going to be waivers exempt come next year. He's not really an offensive defenseman. He's more of a stay-at-home guy. Marek Alscher is a guy who's a left-handed shot. Miklos Havorka is a right-handed shot. Marek Alscher is a guy who's a big body defenseman who plays a really physical brand of hockey, and he's a humongous dude. So is Miklos Havorka, but Mike Benning's skating, although he's not big, he's 5'9". That is going to be what's going to make him in the NHL, which we've seen so many players. For the example, Lane Hudson, who's undersized, but he's his skating and his stick skills have been the reason for him to has been his reason for striving so far in the NHL. But what if the Panthers could have two of those guys in Seth Jones on power play 1, and then Mike Benning, and that could really improve their power play come 2026-27, because we've seen how much scoring, the lack of scoring, and obviously it has to do with the fact that Barkov is not also there to play defensively, and that really helps the transition opportunities for the Panthers, and it's as far as give and goes. But what if you could have two? But at the same time, do you want to have that situation where you don't have any waivers exempt players on their decor? But if you decide to keep both, then that cap room that you have come next year, which right now it's still projected to be 104 million for the NHL, that gives you a whole bunch of flexibility to maybe give Bobrovsky more than we were actually anticipated, or you could use that as far as bringing in another depth forward to the mix as well for this group, and that could really truly improve the scoring, which has been down this year. So, but at the same time, the fact that the Panthers were able to get a great asset as far as the Justin Sordoff trade, what if you can do that again in Mike Benning? And Mike Benning, I mean, two prospects for the Panthers who have really shown that they're comfortable at this level, at the NHL level. Sandis Vilmanis earlier in the season, which he's still going to get a chance. He's going to be a waivers exempt forward come next year. And then Mike Benning this year, who's in the last year of being waivers exempt. Those guys have shown that they belong. But I wonder if this play that we've seen out of Benning is a little too late, based on the fact that the timing is just not right for him, based on where the Panthers are trying to get to as far as taking advantage of the window that they are currently in. So, but this gives Benning enough time to prove himself there, even if it's not with the Florida Panthers. And if he does succeed somewhere else, that's another draft pick that Bill Zito is able to hit on. And it hasn't necessarily been a build with this front office of building through the draft and everything. But when you see the value of how they use the picks in order to get NHL ready players, that's another success for this Florida Panthers team, as far as how they use that to wheel and deal, which people talk about free agency and how it's going to be a dud. Teams are going to have to try to improve themselves via trades. Panthers were proactive in that right in Bill Zito's first season there. So they were ahead of the game. Will this be another situation where Bill Zito gets ahead of the game? Wouldn't surprise me whatsoever. But we're going to transition to segment number 3, where we are going to preview tonight's game between the Florida Panthers and the Minnesota Wild in the second game of this quick 2-game homestand before the Panthers hit the road. We'll discuss all of that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And there's nothing like an NBA arena. The crowd, energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. Pulled up the Game Time app, picked an upcoming NBA game, and had tickets locked in within minutes. Love seeing the all-in prices up front. No surprise fees at checkout. And being able to see the view from the seat before buying made everything easy. Zone deals stood out. Choose the section. Game Time picks the seats, and you can save. Great last-minute options, too, with NBA tickets showing up at solid prices. Everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free start to finish. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off of your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. And I'd like to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday. So the Panthers take on the Minnesota Wild tonight, which is going to be a 7 p.m. nationally televised game on ESPN with Bob Wischusen and Ray Ferraro. And before we preview tonight's game between the two teams, I do want to send my thoughts out to the family of Jesse Pierce, who is the NHL correspondent for the Minnesota Wild, her and her 3 children tragically passed away in a house fire. And I never met Jesse Pierce, but just goes to show that when a lot of people and talk positively about you, and all of them say something positive and nothing negative about you, it really shows that you lived a meaningful life there. So I do want to send my condolences there, and always made people feel welcome from what a lot of other national reporters have been saying based on that. But so tough to transition from there into tonight's game, but let's do it anyway there. But Panthers and Wild last met on January 24th, which is one of the Panthers' 5 3-game winning streaks of the season. Yeah, 5 sounds like a lot based on that, but the Panthers haven't been able to add anything on and only have had a winning streak more than 3 games once, and that was in mid-December there for them. So I looked it up for you guys so you guys didn't have to. So yeah, it has been that much of an inconsistency for the Panthers that they haven't been able to put up long stretches of winning, and as far as keeping in the playoff race. But that, let's not forget, that was a game where 5 of the 7 goals that were scored were special teams goals. That was Brad Marchand's first game back from injury after he suffered it in the Toronto game, and it was an injury that he was facing for multiple weeks, and it was just too much for Brad Marchand to overcome, and then honestly was just continuing to try to play through it just to make it to the Olympics. So if the Olympics had not happened, if this were not an Olympic year, we would have seen Brad Marchand's season end probably a lot earlier for them. So going into this game, I'm just going to list the players of who was in that game back on the 24th and who's not going to be in the lineup this time around. So in that game versus who's not going to be in this one: AJ Greer, who's suspended; Mackie Samoskevich, who's not ready to return; Sam Reinhart, still no answers on his doctor visits; Anton Lundell, rib injury, season's likely over; Brad Marchand, same thing with the doctor's visits; Sandis Vilmanis, down in the AHL; Jeff Petrie, traded to these Minnesota Wild, by the way, which less than 1% chance I think that we'll see a tribute video of him. Very short-lived time as a Panther. Tobias Bjornfoot, waivers down in Charlotte; Uvis Belinskas, same injury timeline as Nico Mikkola. Yeah, he's not returning this season neither. And Sergei Bobrovsky, he's not injured, but he's not starting in tonight's game, which is going to be a Daniil Tarasov start for the Panthers. So vastly different as far as tonight's game for the Florida Panthers versus what they had in front of them on January 24th, just a few months ago. And that was one of the more exciting games, especially because the Panthers responded after giving up a shorthanded goal less than a minute later, where Sam Bennett scored on the power play, and then Brad Marchand scored in overtime to give the Panthers the win. And that was a throwback night for the Minnesota Wild for them there, as the Panthers were wearing their home reds on the road in that game, which it's 90s night for the Panthers. They already changed their social media pages to the Leaping Panther, which on the post game tonight with Nick Fairbanks, I'm going to wear my sense of 90s attire related to South Florida sports. So if you're just listening to this on audio and want to watch us on YouTube, subscribe so that you could see what I'll be wearing tonight. But the Minnesota Wild, they're in a strange place standing wise, because they're 12 points ahead of the Utah Mammoth, but 5 points behind the Dallas Stars, which the Stars have a game in hand. So if they win, assuming they win that game in hand, so as much as 7. So around 10 to 12 games for left for the majority of the NHL. The Minnesota Wild are just trying to get to the playoffs healthy. And the strange part about where they're at right now is that they don't have any really major injuries on their roster. I just checked their daily faceoff. I made sure to scroll down all the way to see what their major injuries are. There really aren't any there. So, but at the same time, I do not trust their center depth as far as the ability to make a difference in the playoffs. Which right now the Panthers, if there's any team to root for as far as an extended run, it's the Minnesota Wild, based on the conditions that were sent from the Jeff Petrie trade, which is a conditional 7th that could become a 5th if he plays 50% of the games and they advance multiple rounds, which is the same conditions as Brad Marchand. But what are the chances that Jeff Petrie actually plays in 50% of those playoff games in his late 30s there, if Minnesota is trying to contend? I think that if Jeff Petrie is playing playoff games for the Minnesota Wild, even in 2026, I think that means that they are in trouble, or that they're just facing an injury that they can't overcome. So that's one thing there. But on the other side, as far as the goaltending matchup, I mentioned Tarasov earlier. Jesper Wallstedt will be between the pipes for the Minnesota Wild as they take on the Florida Panthers. And obviously the Florida Panthers are one of the bigger questions is what's going to be happening with the goaltending department past this season. I know a lot of Florida Panther fans have been mentioning Jesper Wallstedt as a possible trade because Kirill Kaprizov's contract kicks in next year. And I know Quinn Hughes will be extension eligible, come July 1st. His won't kick in until the year after. But with those two and the superstars and just trying to take advantage of their championship window and the fact that they already paid Philip Gustafsson, they're going to have to try to find a cheaper option as far as backup goaltender, although the Jesper Wallstedt does have a true upside. So they're going to be asking for quite a lot in a trade. So I really, really do question whether the Florida Panthers are going to have enough to trade for Wallstedt. But at the same time, this is a product of the fact that the Panthers have traded first round picks over and over again, and the fact that they're going to end up losing some bidding wars there. But again, if the Panthers do end up getting a top 10 lottery pick, which the draft lottery will be on May 5th, then we could really truly discuss options then on where the Panthers really do go in the direction of that pick there. So that is something to monitor. That's something to really see on what the Panthers are going to do, because if you don't have the goaltending to complement your blue line, and then your healthy, hopefully healthy forwards, and having Alexander Barkov back into the mix, and the fact that him and Sam Reinhart are a great pair together on the PK, which crazy to think that the Panthers PK has still been a really great bright spot for this team, despite kind of the mess as far as 5-on-5 goals against, which the Panthers are second to last in save percentage. That could be very, very encouraging if they're able to at least get someone to challenge Sergei Bobrovsky, because over the years, the backup for Sergei Bobrovsky has been the solidified backup, and Sergei Bobrovsky has known that he was going to be getting the majority of the reps. And with Spencer Knight at the time being a first round draft pick there for Florida, there was always that thing in the back of his head, is like, I got to be at my best. So that could be the Bill Zito can bring in another person who knows that Bobrovsky will be heading into his 40s, and it's like, okay, and that could also bring the best out of him. So I hope that Bill Zito this offseason will be one that is very aggressive to try to get someone like Jesper Wallstedt, but I question what the ask will be for him. But we'll see what happens. As far as Minnesota and where they are, chances are they're going to be facing the Dallas Stars in the first round, which I will give the advantage to Dallas there, as they've creeped up on Colorado, but Colorado is still a good amount of points away ahead of them. So it looks like that matchup is going to be locked in. We'll see if the penalty kill for Minnesota can be up to the task as well when they do get to game one of the Stanley Cup playoffs, because that has been the main issue of them. But 5-on-5, where the majority of the games are played, they've been just fine, and their goaltending has been able to get them to wins. But that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you guys, as always, for listening. Make sure to come back on Friday's edition of the show, where Nick Fairbanks and I will recap this game between the Florida Panthers and the Minnesota Wild. Thank you guys, as always, for listening. And in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steele Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.